What does our understanding of God say about our psyches? Let's look at how we form images of the divine in our minds. Welcome, if you haven't been here already. I am so glad you joined me in blooming beyond belief and looking at religion through the lens of psychology. And for this one, I really intend for it to be a way to unpack God from a psychological perspective and look at the psyche and our representations, our mental representations of the divine, and help to give some clarity how this works. So in today's little journey that we'll go on together, I pray that you take the time to stay with me all the way through to the end and really devote your attention here to really open yourself up to receive wisdom, maybe some clarity, maybe some new knowledge about this topic. I want to start off with a verse from Psalm 34:18 that says, "The Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves the crushed in spirit." Why do I pick this verse to begin? Well, this verse, or I call it a seed, addresses the emotional pain often explored in psychodynamic theories, right? It acknowledges that many individuals, and you might be too, grappling with feelings of brokenness on your journey of life, which can profoundly influence your perception of who God is and your relationship to God. Sometimes the brokenness that you have endured alters your perception of God for the better or for the worse. But God says that He is near the brokenhearted. He's near those, and He saves those who are crushed in spirit. He brings you back to life again. If you let Him, if you give it the time and the space and the openness to receive His love. So as we discuss the formation of God representations, we recognize that personal struggles, right, often shape our understanding of the divine and our spiritual experiences. And we might also understand a little bit more here how our earthly relationships can influence the way that we view our relationship to God. So we'll look at all of this together, and how I want to structure this discussion here is, first I'll go into explaining Freud's view of the origin of the image of God, because he has a more critical point of view, but there's also something there to be looked at, I think. And then I will go into giving an account of some theories called object relations theory, attachment theory, and self-psychology, and how these theories can shed some light on the development and the maturation of our relationship to God, which can shift and change at any moment. And then lastly, I'm going to explain the developmental kind of theory that Fowler gave. That is one that basically has several stages to it, and it talks about the development of religiosity throughout life and how that can play out. Very interesting theory, which I highly recommend you stick till the end to hear that one. So to begin, explaining Freud's view here and the origin of the image of God. So as I've already mentioned a little bit in a previous video, I mentioned how he had a more critical point of view of God and of religion, how it serves more of like a, how do I say, defense mechanism, right? That we adopt to be able to handle the existential pressure and the existential questions of life. So I'm gonna mention a few things here. Father imago as prototype, projection as, of internal needs, cultural and historical influence, and religion as illusion. So Freud's view was basically that he thought of the image of God as originating from object representations. Just the way that we think of a plant or a dog or a wife or a husband or something like that, we store these object representations in our minds about that through experience, right? And through having seen it several times, and then we conclude that that is the thing. So he viewed the image of God as an object representation formed during early childhood, so throughout our first developmental years, specifically the mental representation of the father figure. Okay, the father figure was the one that then ended up over time being projected into a God as well, or we thought of God as our father figure on earth and that there would be a connection there. So his psychoanalytic perspective emphasized the following key points. Again, father imago as prototype. So Freud really theorized that the image of God is derived from the child's exalted perception of the father. And the father is seen as powerful, wise, and protective. And these representations are then, or will then, form the basis for their conceptualization of who God is. They think of God then as powerful, wise, and protective. Then you have heard the term of the devil, right? And the devil, conversely, represents the feared or negative aspects of the father figure on earth, reflecting early ambivalent feelings towards their father or towards their parent. So you have the devil and you have the father in heaven being a projection of one's earthly father and their positive and negative kind of aspects. Does that make sense? I hope it does. And then also, he emphasized another point again, projection of internal needs. So we all have needs, right? And he thought that God is a psychological projection of the human desire for protection and comfort. And this projection arises from feelings of helplessness and of dependency experienced during the first years of life. And so we strive to have that. And obviously our earthly fathers won't be with us all the time. In fact, most of the time. So most of the time he'll not be in our lives as we progress through and beyond childhood. Then there's no father in and around us. So a lot of people then would project, as Freud believes, their experience of the father onto a heavenly father that would always be with them, and that always would have these qualities that I kept talking about here. And in adulthood, this dependency then that they had on their earthly father is sublimated into faith, as individuals then seek the same emotional security and moral guidance that they would receive from their father. But what then if you didn't have that kind of earthly father? What if they were absent? How would that then impact the, relationship to a heavenly father? Interesting question to ask, and we'll get to that. So that was that. And also another key topic that he kept talking about is the cultural, or the primeval father. So the cultural and historical influence here is that Freud extended the theory beyond individual psychology, and he suggested that the primeval father of the human ancestral past, as in the leader of the primal horde, contributed to the collective image of God. And he explored this idea in Totem and Taboo and Moses and Monotheism, proposing that humanity's guilt over the symbolic murder of the father reinforced the need for a benevolent divine figure. All right, fairly complex, this one. I'm not quite sure if I fully grasped it myself, but I do think that there's something there about just like needing a leader of some kind. And so Freud thought that everyone needs a leader. If their earthly father is there their entire life, then there's something in the deepness of the core of our needs that just needs a leader to look to. And so that becomes God for a lot of people. This is how he viewed it. And one more thing there is that he viewed religion literally as an illusion. He thought it was an illusion. So he believed religion to be a defense mechanism, as I've already said, a form of wish fulfillment that helps individuals cope with existential anxiety and questions and vulnerabilities such as death and life's uncertainties. And there might be something to that, you know, but it might not be the full picture, as we will look into later. And he characterized religion literally as an illusion, and maintaining the faith in God he thought was rooted in an immature dependency rather than objective reality. So he didn't believe in God at all, actually. He thought of it as an illusion and kind of immature to have that belief. I've already mentioned a little bit about oceanic feeling and infantile narcissism in a previous video, but I'll cover it here as well for those who didn't see that one. If you haven't, I highly encourage to see the other one. And when it comes to oceanic feeling, Freud identified mystical experiences and feelings of unity with the divine, and he thought of it as a resurrection of infantile narcissism, reflecting a return to the symbiotic union with the mother and the dependency of the father. So this oceanic feeling of like oneness and seeking oneness with something, he thought of as like going back to the stage where we're at when we were 3 in infantile narcissism and wanting to recreate that with a god. And he also had a thought of, you know, cultural monotheism or on that topic, because monotheism means one god, right? And in Moses and monotheism, Freud argued that the abstract, imageless God of monotheism represents a sublimation of the father figure, prioritizing intellectual and moral ideas or ideals over sensory representations. Now, I thought we would move into the other kind of topic or question here, which is giving an account of the different types of theories other than Freud's that we can look at to shed some light on the developmental and the kind of progressive journey of our relationship to God and the maturation of the God representation. And I've thought a lot about this because like my God representation has completely changed. And interestingly enough, that has also shifted and changed the way that I'm in relation to my earthly father. From viewing God as like this strict kind of persona or someone sitting on a cloud that I didn't have a relationship to at all, and I didn't really like have that much emotional relationship to my earthly father either, to evolving throughout my life to see God as literally like the most warm, loving presence and father that I could ever imagine. And having had a personal encounter with him, I just can't forget it. And that encounter has completely changed the way that I relate to anyone around me. And we'll talk about this, especially when it comes to the attachment theory, I think. But there's different theories here. Object relation theory, attachment theory, and self-psychology. Okay, so we start off with object relation theory. Let's just put on our seatbelt to just enter theory land. So object relation theory by Anna Maria Rosado. The core idea of the object relations theory is that, like looking at religion, right, is that religious belief is shaped by early relationships with our caregivers. The mental representations or objects of the significant others, such as then parents and all of that, influence the way that we relate to God as well. And it's fairly similar actually to, you know, the way that Freud viewed it. The development of God representation, looking at it through this object relations theory, is that early experiences with caregivers nurturing or punitive behaviors are internalized and then form the basis for our God representation. So this God representation may then reflect positive aspects of both parents. So if we then have positive experiences with our parents, we will form a God representation of a loving, caring, guiding God. It could also serve as a psychological compensation for negative parental figures. So you might have an idealized God contrasting with harsh parents. So you just idealize something different than what you have experienced with your parents. Yeah? There's also something to say about cultural symbols and religious teachings further shaping the God representations. So the way that the symbols in and around us are talking about God and the religious teachings that we encounter throughout our lives, that can also shape the way that our object representations about God can change. And I keep thinking about like the way that I just view the cross, like the cross has changed throughout my life, from like literally having no relationship to it, like bluntly ignoring it, to literally like it being the symbol that I navigate my life from, and me like living in the center of that cross and picking up my cross, daily and following Jesus. Like that means something to me now because I've had a personal experience of why that ought to be the way to live a meaningful, fulfilling life. That sacrifice is actually beautiful and is a huge part of why we're here and I think that that's been an evolution, right, throughout life, of having endured that and seeing the beauty that God can create out of suffering. And it has me resonate differently with that symbol. So that's just a way to kind of contemplate on how that's related to my experience. Then the next theory is attachment theory. You might have heard of attachment theory. It's by Bowlby and Ainsworth. And the core idea of attachment theory is that the psychological bond between a child and their caregiver forms the foundation of how individuals then relate to others, including God. So that shouldn't be something new, right? It's the same way that, our relationship to our parents typically also shape the way that we interact in relationships to others sometimes. And we also have that relationship with the Father, with God, with the beyond. And in attachment theory, we talk about, secure attachment, anxious attachment, avoidant attachment, insecure attachment, all the things. But in like looking at it through this lens, we have secure attachment, insecure ambivalent attachment, insecure avoidant attachment, and disorganized attachment. So with secure attachment, individuals with that secure early attachment to their parents, to their caregivers, will then form a safe and secure kind of base for the way that we then also view our relationship to God. And it creates the base from which we can begin to explore our relationship to God, just the same way we can explore our relationship to others. Then you have the insecure ambivalent attachment, and this may lead to over dependence on God. Think of it as like codependency, right? You can over depend on God, mirroring clinging behavior toward caregivers with heightened anxiety over separation or perceived rejection. It makes sense when you have that insecure ambivalent attachment to your caregivers that you then might also be clingy to God, and that you then have anxiety about what God will think of you. Because if you had parents where you did something and one day they reacted one way and another day they reacted a different way, now if that is your day today, you're going to maybe project that onto God and the relationship to Him, that He might also be having inconsistent ways of meeting you. And the third one is insecure avoidant attachment. So what is avoidant? Well, individuals may then avoid emotional reliance on God. You might avoid emotional reliance on God, suppressing spiritual needs to protect against rejection. So in the same way that maybe your parents were avoidant with their emotions, they weren't emotionally available with you, they weren't seeing you, they weren't caring about your day, they weren't asking you deep questions, they were just maybe there, or maybe they weren't there at all, then that might influence the way that you won't let God into your heart. You won't express your needs. You won't dare to be vulnerable with God because you've been avoidant. You've been avoidant, or you've experienced avoidance from people in your life. So reflect on that if that's been your experience. And then lastly, disorganized attachment. This is associated with conflicting feelings about God due to unpredictable caregiving, leading to fluctuating or chaotic religious beliefs. So if you've grown up in a place where, there's been chaotic religious beliefs, or there's been unpredictable caregiving, like I mentioned, where you've been there's just been a lot of back and forth and how people have treated you, that can cause that disorganized attachment to God, where you're one day trusting him, the other day you don't. One day you keep him at the center of your life, and another day you don't, etc., etc. Yeah, so those are the four. Just to sum up those, you have secure attachment, insecure ambivalent attachment, insecure avoidant attachment, and disorganized attachment. And then we have one point under that one, attachment theory, that I also want to mention: correspondence and compensation hypothesis. So the correspondence hypothesis says that secure attachments with caregivers generalize to secure, trusting relationships with God. Makes sense. Compensation hypothesis says that individuals with insecure attachments may see God as a surrogate attachment figure, particularly during crises, to regulate stress and anxiety. So this is what attachment theory says about our relationships to God. It really looks at how did our early attachments form us and shape us, and how did those attachment styles, how can those reflect our relationship to God? Yeah? And there's the correspondence and compensation hypothesis. Then lastly, self-psychology is another theory. What do you hear, Grace? What do you hear? Yeah, the self-psychology one by Kohut. Interesting name, I love that. The core idea of the self-psychology theory is that God functions as a self-object, providing emotional nourishment, mirroring, and support for self-cohesion. And it basically is very it's almost like self-oriented in a way, where it's God serves the self. And the key aspects of this is, first, idealization. God serves as an idealized figure, offering a sense of purpose, stability, and belonging. And there's a few psychological functions here of this take on it as well. It provides a framework for emotional regulation during times of distress. And it also strengthens the individual's sense of identity and resilience by fostering self-cohesion. So it strengthens yourself. And this makes sense. looking at my journey and coming to Christ, I definitely feel a sense of maturation. My self-cohesion is more I know myself in a way more. I know myself through the identity of God and the Word, and it's provided a framework for me to really exist in, and it's not constructed. It feels like home, and it's like a house. It's like a temple to live and breathe in. And I become that house and temple too, for that Spirit to come through in relation to others. So I agree with that there's psychological functions of religion and faith. And lastly, developmental implications too of this self-psychology kind of framework. Early self-objects like caregivers influence how individuals relate to spiritual figures like God. A secure and healthy self-structure allows for a mature and flexible relationship with God, while an unstable self-structure may lead to rigid or compensatory faith practices. So that kind of wraps up the second part. And now we're moving into the third one, which is explaining the development of religiosity throughout life. So that wraps up the second part of this little journey, and now we move on into the third section, where I'll explain the development of religiosity throughout life by looking at Fowler's stages. So Fowler's theory is really what we'll look at, Fowler's stages of faith development. Super interesting. How is it that faith can develop? This is what Fowler was all about. And Fowler described 6 stages of faith development, reflecting how individuals' understanding of religiosity and their relationship with God evolved throughout life. Actually, yeah, well, there's 6 stages, but I mean, there's kind of 7 points. So I'll go through them. I'll just cover first what the different stages are so you can follow along. Stage 0, so it starts on 0, undifferentiated faith in infancy. Stage 1, intuitive projective faith, that is ages 3 to 7. Stage 2, mythical literal faith, that is adolescence. And stage 4, individuative reflective faith, young adulthood. Stage 5, conjunctive faith, midlife. And stage 6, universalizing faith, that's rare. Now, I want to point one thing out, and that is that an individual doesn't need to go through all of these like one by one. And also, it is not necessarily so that it has to align with someone's age and where they are in life. Someone can, for instance, stay stuck at a certain stage throughout all of life. And others might jump all the way through to universalizing faith, which is very rare, or have a conjunctive faith early on in their life, and vice versa. So I just want to point that out there. Let's start with stage 0, okay? Just gonna grab a little bit of tea. Oh, okay. So stage 0, undifferentiated faith. Infancy is what's most typical for this stage, all right? Or what Fowler identified. When you have an undifferentiated faith, what does that mean? Well, it means that it's undifferentiated. The foundation here is that you basically have basic trust formed through early caregiving relationships, which aligns to the different theories that we've talked about this far, especially attachment theory and object relation theory. Pre-language stage, where attachment experiences shape emotional capacities for future faith. So this is the time where, we're developing our language and everything, and this is that stage where attachment experiences to other people shape emotional capacities, the way that we're able to hold faith and experience faith. So if we don't move through our emotional, linguistical development properly, that can cause a disruption in our faith. Now, this is undifferentiated faith, though. So that's stage 0. We kind of all start there with articulating ourselves, with understanding emotions and expressing them. So that is that. And then stage 1, intuitive projective faith. This is ages 3 through to 7. The characteristics of this one is imaginative and symbolic thinking is what kind of dominates, and beliefs are shaped by stories, caregivers, and visual representations. And an example here would be if a child perceives God as a protective and nurturing figure, then that would be much like a parental caregiver, right? So it aligns to what we've talked about before in a way where, if you think back to when you were 3, even though you might not remember all of that, 3 through 7, this is a developmental stage where you typically hear a lot of stories, your imagination is hyper aware or engaged, and you kind of view things and things speak to you differently than what you otherwise would have experienced, because during this stage your subconscious mind is not fully developed yet. Okay, your conscious mind is not fully developed yet properly, where you consider yourself an adult. You're living in this place of being driven more by the subconscious mind, which is receptive to a lot of ideas, to a lot of experiences. You live a lot in the alpha and the theta brainwave, especially during those first ages. And definitely at this stage 0, you're like all just subconscious mind. You're just fully open, you get programmed, you get shaped and molded. But during that stage of 3 to 7, the way that parents talk to you about God through stories can really shape the way that you view God eventually, right? And then stage 2 is the mythic literal faith. This is at school age. And the characteristics of this part is faith is tied to concrete narratives and moral structures. So good is rewarded and bad is punished. And here children view God as an authority figure who enforces rules and fairness. So here they have a if you are at this stage right now, even though that you're in school age, you might view God as someone that punishes or is rewarding you. And it's very much black and white. It's shaped a lot from our experience, like growing up in school, let's say, and just in general during school age, where it's very much about performance. So if you're at this stage, you might want to perform for God. You might want to do certain things in order to be accepted by God. And you're living from this place of performance and deep unworthiness, meeting that unworthiness through performance, I think anyways. And this is the mythic literal faith stage. Then you have stage 3, synthetic conventional faith. This is in adolescence. What characterizes this stage? Here, faith is shaped by relationships and community values with external authorities like religious leaders playing a very certain role. And an example here would be adolescents relying on their church community to define their faith. And you see this a lot in, people growing up in the faith or growing up in religion, where they kind of just go along with what their parents do for a certain while, even into adolescence, before they might rebel later on, because they didn't have a personal faith. They didn't have a personal encounter. They didn't have a personal conviction. They hadn't gone through that further on stage. They were in this stage of a synthetic conventional faith. It's synthetic. It's not real. It's just something that they might have received from people around them, that they think that they should follow this, but then it's not actually, encapsulated, integrated, or not even integrated. It's not naturally flourishing from that seed of truth within them, or from the beyond, from God. Just God really talks about this also in scripture, how, or I think Jesus talks about it, how, people that are called, they're called through the Father. And it's not something that someone can push or force upon anyone, So that is that stage of synthetic conventional faith. Then you have stage 4, individuative reflective faith. The characteristics of this one is critical reflection leads to a personal system of beliefs, moving away from external authorities. And this is where, for instance, a young adult redefines their image of God based on personal life experiences rather than parental or institutional teachings. This is where a lot of people are at when they move through a conversion, or where you're at when you are literally experiencing God and you have a personal encounter, you have a personal experience, personal knowing, and it's touched you and your heart from beyond and not from people or places or things or institutional teachings. This is often, again, where you have critically evaluated something. You have literally sat with something for a long time. You have contemplated. The monks keep talking about this, the nuns keep talking about this, the saints talk about this, and Jesus exemplified this, going into the desert and being there for 40 days and just being there and contemplating, and receiving these insights. This is so important and is what is happening in the individuative reflective faith stage. Then you have the conjunctive faith stage, oftentimes in midlife. The characteristics of this one is acceptance of life's paradoxes and complexity. Integration of symbolic and abstract understandings. So I can resonate with this even though that I'm not in midlife, I'm not in midlife yet, but I can hold the paradoxes of life, of, beauty and ugliness, of, just like courage and fear, of good and bad, of like understanding that life is full of complexity, health and disease, and life and death, and just all of that kind of collapses into truth, where you no longer live on these edges and trying to like sculpt reality into just goodness or just the other, because you see the value of both and how both are necessary to live a fulfilling life, and that peace is found in understanding that life is full of paradoxes and complexity, and that is exactly what makes it life. Instead of striving for simplicity and everything needing to have like one answer with like two, what's it called? Stripes under the answer. Just like one answer, black and white thinking, it just goes out the mind, goes out the heart, and you're able to live in that place of mystery. So this is conjunctive faith, and you're able to comprehend the abstract understandings of symbols and painting and art and all the beauty of creativity. Yeah. An example there would be viewing God as both transcendent and immanent, allowing for nuanced understanding of spirituality, understanding that God is not just up there. God is with us, around us, beyond us, all at once. So isn't that funny? Like, I just think it's funny to like move from viewing it as God is just up there and I'm down here and that's it, but being able to hold the concept or the understanding that he can move through me and is in me, is around me, and is beyond. Like that is conjunctive faith. Then we move to universalizing faith. This is the last stage, stage 6, characterized by faith transcending self-focus, embodying universal compassion and justice. So this is where you might say that you're experiencing the fruits of the Spirit, and that is peace, love, patience, self-control, and all these things. A lot of different fruits of the Spirit. Look into those. And this is also where you're then able to have and hold that compassion for anyone in and around you on this earth. You understand that God is a God of the universe. God is a God of people. God is the God of you and me. God is the God that is with us and around us all over. And it allows us to hold that unconditional love that Jesus had for us and has for us still. And here, just examples would be figures like Mother Teresa or Gandhi, who demonstrate this stage through their unconditional love and commitment to the greater good. And I think that there's something to be said about, unconditional love and what that is, and seeing how so many people from all walks of life and all walks of spirituality and religion, they're all very centered on that one thing, and that is love. And that there is some universal beyond us that speaks to each and one of us in an interesting way, where that is collective and it's individual at the same time. So just want to conclude here, right, with all that I've mentioned. First, Freud, attachment theory, object relations, and Fowler stages together, all of what we've just mentioned, provide a comprehensive framework for understanding the development of religiosity. That's such a tough word to say. Religiosity. Jesus. Yeah. Religiosity. Religiosity and God representations. So I hope that these different theories and ways of looking at religion can really help you understand the development of religion, and that you can find yourself in different stages. And as I mentioned, Freud highlighted the psychological origins of God image, while attachment and self-psychology emphasize relational dynamics and really their influence on spiritual maturation. And Fowler's theory adds a developmental perspective here, showing how faith really evolves from childhood dependency to mature, abstract understandings, going from this to grand. And just like the mustard seed grows into a big tree of faith. And together, instead of just saying, oh no, I don't agree with that, or I'm not gonna say that I believe in that, see if there's some grain of truth in all of them. See how you're able to hold them and kind of just observe those different theories to be able to understand this faith development, or the God representation, how that can develop over time. Because together, these insights reveal how early experiences and relational experiences, childhood experiences, emotional needs, and life stages shape the dynamic relationship between humans and the beyond, the divine God. And as we wrap up, I invite you to consider how your understanding of God has been shaped by your experiences and your relationships. How has that changed and shifted for you? Have it changed at all or not? If it's not changed, have your relationships changed? Have your perception of your relations and relationships changed? Do you think that you looking at, the relationships of yours on this earthly plane and working with the relations there could affect the relation that you might have to God? And vice versa. You could go about it the other way as well. Look at, what is my relationship to God? What are the characteristics of my relationship to God right now? How do I view God? And sit with that and then ask the question, well, if I view God that way, how do I view my parental caregivers or their relationships in my family? How do I relate to them? Because there might be some overall commonalities there that can further mature you, develop you, and have you become ultimately a greater channel and instrument of God's love, of the beyond's love, of that which we all have in common, that love, okay? That yearning to express that and receive that from others. And you're the answer there. So that's the question I want to leave you with. And I also want to ask you, what images of the divine have you internalized, and how might they influence your spiritual journey? And within the garden community, these things are the things that we talk about, we contemplate on, and truly this is why I'm here. I'm literally here to contemplate these things. I love it so much, and I love to engage other people in contemplating on these things too, to deeply think, deeply feel, deeply know, and let that change the way that you engage with the world, the way that you create, the way that you speak, the way that you relate. That is the answer to be able to connect with oneself, others, and the great beyond. So you're welcome into the garden. You can check out the link just below. And in there, again, we are just gathering together both in person in Oslo, but also there's online gatherings, and there's guides to grow in your spiritual sacred journey, as well as coaching and a chat and a community. So So welcome in there, and thank you for having been with me up until now, unpacking God from the psychological perspective, looking at the image of God and the God representations and the way that our faith can develop over time.